For over 1,000 years, Rome stood as the heartbeat of the Western world, its legions marching from the windswept moors of Britain to the sands of the Sahara. Laws, roads, and culture radiated outward from the eternal city like spokes of a mighty wheel. Yet beneath the marble facades and imperial triumphs, forces of decay were slowly gathering strength. Civil wars eroded unity, economic pressures hollowed out prosperity, and new religions shifted loyalties away from the state. By the 5th century, the unimaginable became real. The Western Empire crumbled. In this series, we uncover the full story of why Rome fell, not in a single night, but over centuries of struggle and change. Rome in the 2nd century under Trajan seemed unstoppable, its borders stretching from Scotland to Mesopotamia. Trade flowed through ports and cities brimming with marble temples and bustling forums. The legions enforced Pax Romana, ensuring stability and prosperity for millions of subjects. Yet expansion came with a cost: stretched supply lines, cultural tensions, and enormous administrative complexity. Few at the time imagined these were warning signs, but history shows even the mightiest structures develop cracks long before collapse. The empire's economic engine roared as gold from conquered lands funded aqueducts, amphitheaters, and monumental baths. Behind the grandeur, however, the economy relied on continuous conquest, tribute, and slavery. When expansion slowed, so did the inflow of wealth, and taxes began to rise. Citizens felt the strain while elites competed for influence at court. As seeds of future discontent were being sown under the guise of stability, ordinary Romans sensed shifts in subtle ways. Coinage became lighter, grain shipments faltered, and the once predictable government grew less responsive. Provincial governors jostled for autonomy, while the Senate's authority eroded. What looked like minor administrative adjustments were actually cracks in the foundation. Rome's peak contained within it the causes of its decline. The death of Marcus Aurelius ushered in an era where emperors rose and fell with alarming speed. Assassinations and palace coups became routine, eroding public faith in imperial rule. Without a steady hand, the empire lurched from one policy to another, creating instability at every level. Civil wars consumed precious resources and diverted troops from defending the borders. What once was a disciplined hierarchy began to resemble a revolving door of power. Each new ruler promised reform but often lacked the time or legitimacy to enact it. Ambitious generals declared themselves emperor, sparking fresh rounds of conflict. Provinces accustomed to Roman order saw only chaos emanating from the capital. The people who once looked to Rome for protection now questioned its ability to govern. The constant turmoil undermined the very concept of a unified empire. When leadership is fragile, loyalty frays, and without loyalty, an empire cannot stand. The crisis of the 3rd century was more than a political hiccup. It was a prelude to fragmentation and decline. Rome's economy, built on conquest and slave labor, began to falter as new conquests dwindled. Without fresh wealth, the state turned to heavy taxation and debasing its currency. Inflation soared, eroding the value of savings and salaries alike. Farmers abandoned their land, trade slowed, and urban centers grew restless under financial strain. An empire that once fed others now struggled to feed itself. The cost of maintaining legions, roads, and administration grew while revenues shrank. Rome's once vibrant internal market fractured as provinces tried to protect their own interests. Regional economies began functioning almost independently, weakening the cohesive imperial network. Economic hardship also struck the morale of citizens. A sense of decline permeated daily life as public works decayed and services vanished. The grandeur of Rome was still visible, but increasingly, it was a hollow shell, gilded on the outside and rotting within. At its height, the Roman army was a professional force of disciplined citizens and loyal auxiliaries. By the 4th century, recruitment problems forced emperors to hire foreign mercenaries and grant land to barbarian federates. These soldiers often had little attachment to Roman ideals, fighting more for pay than for patriotism. The shift eroded the reliability of the empire's greatest institution. With borders stretching thousands of miles, even the best army faced impossible demands. Troops shuffled from one hotspot to another, leaving gaps that opportunistic raiders exploited. The Rhine and Danube frontiers, once secure, became porous as resources ran thin. The army's decline was not just in numbers, but in spirit. Training standards slipped, discipline weakened, and commanders turned into political players. Rome's military machine, once the foundation of its dominance, became a burden the state could barely afford. Goths, Vandals, Huns, and Franks were not merely destroyers, but displaced peoples seeking land and stability. Pushed westward by the Huns, they pressed against Rome's frontiers with increasing desperation. When integration failed, invasion followed. The catastrophic defeat at Adrianople in 378 signaled a turning point. Rome could no longer assume victory. As Federate troops settled inside imperial borders, the distinction between Roman and barbarian blurred. These groups established semi-autonomous regions, undermining imperial sovereignty. They became both a symptom and a cause of Rome's weakness. Far from sudden, this process unfolded over decades. Each treaty, settlement, and concession chipped away at Rome's authority until the Western Empire was a patchwork of competing powers under a thin imperial veneer. The rise of Christianity transformed the spiritual landscape of the empire. Once a persecuted sect, it became the state religion, altering priorities and allegiances. The church offered an alternative source of authority, often in tension with imperial needs. Military service declined among Christians who preferred the pen to the sword. This shift wasn't the sole cause of collapse, but it changed the character of Roman society. Civic duty eroded as salvation was sought beyond the state. Funds once reserved for temples and civic projects flowed into churches and monasteries. By the time of the last emperors, Rome was no longer the same Rome that had conquered the world. Its identity had shifted from an imperial powerhouse to a patchwork of local and religious loyalties, weakening the glue that held it together. Diocletian's decision to split the empire into eastern and western halves was meant to improve governance. In practice, it siphoned resources to the wealthier east, leaving the west impoverished and exposed. Constantinople thrived while Rome languished. The Eastern Empire maintained stronger trade ties, richer tax bases, and more defensible borders. The Western Empire, reliant on fading agricultural lands and struggling cities, could not match its siblings' resilience. This imbalance meant that when crises struck, the West lacked the means to recover. The fall of the Western Roman Empire was as much a story of Eastern survival as it was of Western failure. The unthinkable happened in 410 AD when Alaric's Visigoths sacked the Eternal City. Though the empire continued, the psychological blow was immense. Rome, once inviolable, had been breached. The world watched the symbol of stability crumble. In 455 AD, the Vandals struck again, plundering Rome and shattering any illusion of security. Each sack eroded confidence, trade, and population. Refugees fled, and provinces questioned the point of allegiance to a failing center. These events were not isolated raids, but symptoms of systemic breakdown. Rome's heart was exposed, and its pulse weakened with each invasion. Pandemics like the Antonine Plague and the Plague of Cyprian decimated populations, weakening armies and economies alike. Fewer workers meant less production, fewer soldiers, and lower tax revenues. These invisible enemies did what legions could not: undermine the empire from within. Climate shifts cooled the Mediterranean, shortening growing seasons and causing food shortages. Malnutrition bred unrest, and famine drove migrations that pressured Rome's borders. Environmental stress compounded political and military failures. Modern science reveals that these factors were not minor but major players in Rome's decline. They formed a silent backdrop to the more visible dramas of war and politics. As the empire struggled, corruption flourished. Offices were sold, bribes routine, and justice uneven. The bureaucracy expanded but became less effective, alienating ordinary citizens. Trust in the system eroded as fairness disappeared. Public works fell into disrepair. Aqueducts leaked, roads crumbled, and defenses went unmanned. Where once Rome inspired awe, it now provoked disappointment and anger. Corruption was both cause and effect. Weak leadership allowed it, and its spread weakened leadership further. The empire was eating itself from the inside. As imperial power waned, local elites stepped into the vacuum. Provincial governors, bishops, and warlords became the real authorities in their regions. Taxes collected locally stayed local, further starving the central government. This decentralization fractured the empire's identity. Citizens who once proudly called themselves Romani now identified with their town, tribe, or faith. The glue of shared citizenship dissolved. By the time Rome realized how fragmented it had become, it was too late. The empire was no longer a single organism, but a collection of competing parts. By the 5th century, emperors were often puppets of powerful generals or barbarian kings. Romulus Augustulus, the last Western emperor, was a teenager when he was deposed by Odoacer in 476 AD. The title of emperor became a hollow honor with no real power. These last rulers presided over a shrinking realm, issuing decrees few obeyed. The imperial court moved from city to city, seeking safety and legitimacy, but finding neither. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus did not shock contemporaries as much as we might think. By then, the empire was already gone in all but name. While the West fell, the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, endured for another 1,000 years. Stronger walls, richer coffers, and a more defensible geography helped it withstand pressures that toppled the West. This survival underscores that Rome's fall was not inevitable. With different choices and conditions, the Western Empire might have endured as well. By studying Byzantium's success alongside the West's failure, we gain a fuller picture of what truly causes empires to collapse and endure. The idea of a sudden fall oversimplifies history. Rome's institutions, culture, and laws persisted into medieval Europe, shaping kingdoms and churches. In many ways, Rome never fully died. It transformed. This myth of a dramatic collapse tells us more about our fears than about Rome itself. Civilizations rarely vanish overnight. They evolve, merge, and leave legacies. Recognizing this continuity helps us understand our own world. The end of Rome was not just an ending, but a beginning for what came after. The story of Rome's decline echoes in the challenges of modern superpowers. Overextension, inequality, political dysfunction, and environmental stress are timeless warning signs. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. By studying Rome, we gain insight into resilience, adaptability, and the costs of complacency. Empires fall when they forget what made them strong. The ruins of Rome are not just stones. They are mirrors reflecting our own vulnerabilities and choices. As we stand among the ruins of the Forum, we see both grandeur and fragility etched in stone. The Roman Empire's collapse was not a single event, but a complex tapestry of decisions, pressures, and transformations. Its echoes shape our laws, languages, and cities even now. Understanding why Rome fell is also understanding how civilizations live and die. If you found this journey illuminating, subscribe and ring the bell to explore more untold histories. Together, we'll uncover the lessons hidden in the past